Now, I want to turn to the dark turn at SFU with this setup. And I want again to begin with Becker's own words. The first quote that you have in your materials is from a letter he wrote to a Professor Moman. No idea who this person is. I've tried to trace him or her. This is dated about, the letter is undated, but I'm pretty sure that it's around July 21st, 1971. And he writes to Professor Moman. This is when he's working on his big manuscript, his only mature work, The Denial of Death, Escape from Evil. Quote, "The main shortcoming of my previous work is that I have not really accounted for human viciousness as I should have. Man is terribly afraid of his own death and of the insignificance of his life. So his whole life is a protest that he is somebody. In this protest, he takes out on others. He will even kill them to show that he can triumph over death. The theoretical problem of our time is to harmonize this knowledge with a humanistic science, and I am now writing what I think is my most mature work toward that end." Then you see how deep his dilemma is at this point, because he's starting to worry and wonder that if he really faces evil in the way it needs to be faced, whether this is even going to be possible then to maintain any kind of optimism whatsoever about the possibility for human enlightenment, individually and collectively. And he describes this in a letter to Harvey Bates, the chaplain whom he met at Syracuse University and has kept up a correspondence with. This is a little earlier in 1971. And he says in that letter, "I am living on the boundary between renouncing the science of man as a bad dream of youth, or a good dream but a bad dream anyway, and on the other hand, of continuing to work as though the words we put together about our condition and our hopes have some meaning for bettering our lot." You see the dilemma. It is right to be in such a dilemma, because in the human condition, nothing is clear-cut. So Becker sees himself as in a dilemma. It's heightened at this point, but he's always seen himself there. This is what he considers to be our state in our existence. We can't resolve all these tensions, the tensions between creating something for ourselves and for others. There's tensions there. There's tensions between living and dying, and living in the right way or in an honest way, and perhaps living longer in a less honest way. All these things are tensions. We can't get away from these kinds of things. So, what does Becker do when he comes to Simon Fraser? He is still after, remember his major goal is that he needs a better theory of evil to ground his philosophical anthropology, to complete his science of man. So the first thing he sets about doing is to reformulate his anthropodicy. This is his way of arguing that humans can be good in the full face of human evil. So earlier in his career, he's had this general idea related to alienation. And this is an explanation for the evil in the world that is caused by human persons and points to those evils that can be prevented or ameliorated by human effort, the form of which is a liberal education that teaches how personal freedom and responsible choice are constrained. In other words, that teaches being good by revealing the causes of evil. At Simon Fraser, Becker becomes unsatisfied, and I think he was unsatisfied even in coming to Simon Fraser, with this earlier formulation. Why? Because he now realizes that he's underestimated the true nature of human evil. He hasn't realized what a wily bugger it is, how it will manipulate and take all that we hold most dear in ourselves, in our beliefs, in our societies, in our loved ones, and twist it toward Armageddon. He now begins to see how tricky this is. In his reformulated anthropodicy, Becker struggles to maintain the possibility of meaningful enlightenment and transcendence in a world where evil is so adept at co-opting even our most heroic projects to undermine the good in ourselves and in our societies. Anytime there's a threat to it, we can just so immediately turn, and if we feel others are evil, we'll do it in spades. It's unbelievable how pervasive that is. And he sees it, but there's something else that's involved with this. And here I want to just talk a little bit about the importance of evil to Becker and his work. And I want to give you the full quote from The Structure of Evil, the 1968 book, the epilogue, the first part of where he says, and this is all in Becker's own words. This is really a remarkable statement to me. Okay. He argues that a credible science of persons must, quote, if it is to shoulder the task it inherited from the demise of medieval cosmology, do three things that were formally assured by religion. One, it must be able to explain evil credibly and offer a way to overcome it. Number two, it would have to define the true, the good, and the beautiful. There really is a strong Platonic aspect to Becker, although he doesn't really mean that in Plato's terms. And third, it would have to reestablish the unity of man and nature, the sense of intimacy with the cosmic process. So he's searching for a way to maintain these functions of religion with the very best that the humanities, social science, and sciences have to offer. Now, he turns to the ideas of Otto Rank. And this is extremely important. I believe he gets this from Paul Rosen, who is professor of political science and a famous historian of psychoanalysis, also in Canada at this time at York University. I'm not sure if it's from Paul, but I used to think it was from Robert Kramer, but Robert Kramer says no, it wasn't from him. So I think it's from Paul Rosen, and so does Kramer, so that makes two of us. What is it about the ideas of Otto Rank that attracts Becker? There's always this talk about Rank, but what is it exactly that attracts Becker? This is what I think it is. Otto Rank's post-Freudian work traces anxiety and fear, human anxiety and fear, to two opposing tendencies that we all have as human beings in the human condition. One of this is a tendency, on the one hand, toward individuation and separateness. The other is a tendency toward collectivity and communion. Those of you who are psychologists may recognize Paul Bakken picked up on these same dimensions. Also from Rank, by the way. Fear of life, according to Rank, is animated by the need to make something of ourselves. Life is challenging. It's demanding. The need to stand, in Becker's terms, on our own feet. This is Becker's Causa Sui project. And it challenges us to create. Fear of death draws us to commune and belong with others, and features our desire to love. It puts death at bay. But, as Becker now realizes, it's on a hair trigger and can move just like lightning to hate and destruction when confronted with different others and different communities. In this way, our creations and loves, and on the flip side, our destructions and hates, define our lives toward our deaths, at both the level of the individual and at the level of societies and cultures. Now, a little bit more about the way in which this influences Becker. After reading Rank, Becker sees that entire societies and cultures, just like individuals, can be caught up in expanded transference phenomena. And he recognizes that we all need inevitably to reach out to transference objects and projects that are not of our own constitution. So causa sui isn't enough. However, since it is cultures and their members who construct them, such objects and projects cannot really offer the assurance and transcendence they promise. All of these, including Becker's own philosophical anthropology, including his own science of man, are idols of our own making. And our defense of them also can issue in not just dogmatism, but evil. Intellectual evil, if not actual evil. Thus, all cultural objects and projects do not really offer the transcendence of our condition and fate that we seek. They're internal to us and our condition. They aren't external. Okay? So you can see that Becker is opening himself up now to possibilities, cosmological possibilities, spiritual possibilities, religious possibilities. Now, what does he do with his theory of evil? In his mature work, in his denial of death, and in Escape from Evil. He thinks he finally provides the theory of evil that he requires for his unified science of the person, for his philosophical anthropology. One which, although facing evil fully, retains the Enlightenment goal of learning to live better with this knowledge. Without such a theory, our uncritical, unconscious allegiances to our cultural and symbolic meaning systems would continue to unleash increasingly destructive levels and amounts of despair and evil. He sees clearly that his theory of evil now must depict cultures as immortality projects. And if these are threatened, good God, where do we turn to? This is where we can really release destructiveness, even murderous mayhem. So what he's done here is he's basically taken the earlier principle of self-esteem maintenance. He hasn't disavowed it in any way, shape, or form. He's folded it now into a bigger problem of living and dying, the principle of immortality striving. Okay? Now, with the principle of immortality striving, Becker explains our fetishized attachments to our groups and cultures and our capacities for destructiveness and evil. The dark irony is that our highest needs and virtues, our belonging, our worth, our heroic sacrifice, can be recruited in the committing of atrocities against others. All social science and the Enlightenment it seeks will fail without an adequate ontology of human nature and the human condition, and such an ontology requires this theory of evil. Human beings, Becker 1975 from Denial of Death, kill out of joy in the experience of expansive transcendence over evil. The idea of death, quote, haunts the human animal like nothing else. It is the mainspring of human activity from escape from evil. Now let's take a look, just to be a little bit more concrete, at how Becker approaches the Holocaust, the evil of the Holocaust. For Becker, the logic of killing others to affirm our own life unlocks the puzzle about the history of evil. The highest heroism is the stamping out of those who are tainted. Thus, evil of the sort exemplified in the Holocaust is a collective and individual embrace of a fetishized heroic, a conquering of the other in a mass refusal to accept insignificance and demise. Scapegoating, dehumanizing, cultural ritualism and symbolism, bureaucratized murder are the thoughtless, stupid, these are words he uses, thoughtless, stupid results of a perverted heroism in the form of a symbolically transcendent mastering of death run amok. The reality of the Holocaust is that of the nation-state needing to represent heroic victory over evil and mortality. The closest I can come to actually finding that in formal Holocaust studies, Dan, you would know probably better than I, is Bartov's 1992 book, The Führer Cult, which I think is really Beckerian in many respects. Now, there's an unresolved personal side to all of this. You're probably sitting there, many of you, and saying, but is this enough? Does this really do what he wants to do? Becker's with you. Becker didn't know either. And it becomes clear as he moves closer toward his own death that he really is uncertain. He doesn't know. The problem with all of this still is that the only way to find a truly external object for the transference of all our anxieties and fears concerning our living and dying is that, and even Becker's theory will not do this for him. And it can't, because it's internal to our living and dying. Here, though, Becker seems, at times, in some of his remarks to Sam Kean in the famous deathbed interview, in some of his letters at this time, and his correspondence with Bob DeFemeray. This is a fantastic correspondence. I talk about it in the monograph published in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. It's in which DeFemeray asks Becker, Ernie, do you think the cancer is in part a result of you becoming too cynical, too depressed? Are you really loving everybody enough? And they go back and forth with these letters as Ernie lies dying about, arguing about whether or not he's letting himself be open enough to others, loving people enough, and so on. It's an unbelievable exchange. But Becker also finds something in Ronk. You see, Ronk actually is, despite it all, quite optimistic. He believes in human creativity. But he also believes in some sort of a cosmic primal force. It's almost like Einstein, in a sense. And it's this commitment. And it's a commitment that is made not necessarily out of belief, but out of existential necessity. if that makes any sense. It may not be good enough, but I think that's as far as it got for Becker, although he wanted it to go further. I think this is why Becker, in his later years at SFU, engages in the study of religious beliefs and texts. He's doing this when he dies, and seems to go back and forth in his assessment of them as possible indicators of viable external transference objects. He dies caught up in these deliberations and possibilities. Had he lived longer, would he have moved in his own work further toward the creativity and spiritual hopefulness of Ranke? Perhaps. Who knows? But the point is that he dies doing what he thinks we all ought to be doing, taking these issues seriously. And Becker was nothing if not serious. So I think there's still an enlightenment project here. And I think it goes back to something I said a little bit earlier, but I want to state more clearly. I think when he's dying, Becker feels that our only hope for enlightened life together is a kind of cosmic heroism that might issue from a fusion of the insights of an idealized social science with the functions of religion, emerging that will require an honest and sustained confrontation with the reality of our condition, our nature, and our limitations. An honest confrontation. His later work clarified both the nature of this confrontation and the extent of the challenge it poses to individuals and to cultures. Now, I know I'm going to run over a little bit here, Deborah, but I'm hoping that I can take just a few minutes to make some additional connections between Becker's life and work.